Hello Nakama, welcome to Nimehara channel. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the latest One Piece news and theories. Now, let's jump right into the discussion. Sins once again showed the progress of the battle in Zoro'S, which had become even more intense now that Gorosei Mars had entered the fray. Previously, he had only been standing guard inside Pangea Castle while the other Gorosei were already engaged on the battlefield. However, because the situation had become critical, where Dragon nearly managed to break into the castle, Mars was forced to join the war himself. Gorosei Mars appeared in his Fuzuan Itsumade mode, soaring above the chaos below. From the sky, he unleashed blasts of fiery beams, just as he had done back on Egghead Island. Dragon was able to handle these attacks with relative ease, but many members of the Revolutionary Army were heavily pressured. This disrupted their focus and made the situation increasingly difficult. Seeing that, Dragon, as the leader, couldn't just stand by. He used his wind powers to lift himself into the air and began battling Gorosei Mars mid-flight. The two clashed fiercely, exchanging devastating techniques one after another. During the fight, Mars suddenly recalled a devil fruit user from hundreds of years ago, someone who possessed the very same fruit as Dragon. In ancient times, that fruit had also belonged to a powerful individual bearing the initial D, someone who stood against the world government. In other words, rebellious individuals with the D initial had been a problem for the government since long before the eras of Rox and Roger. One of them was the original user of Dragon's current devil fruit. Mars had fought that person in the past. At that time, Mars had not yet become one of the Gorosei. He was still one of the Holy Knights. The Gorosei, after all, are chosen by Imu-sama from among the greatest of the Holy Knights. For example, Garling, who was once a Holy Knight, was promoted to Gorosei after Saturn's death. Similarly, before Mars was elevated to Gorosei status, he too had been among the strongest of the Holy Knights in his era. When Mars fought that D user, the battle was fierce, but in the end, that individual managed to gain the upper hand. Not only did he possess the Devil Fruit's power, but his haki was also tremendously strong. However, the world government's reinforcements soon arrived, forcing the D warrior to retreat. Now, Mars thought to himself that he never expected to face another user of that same devil fruit hundreds of years later. This time, Dragon. To Mars, Dragon felt like the reincarnation of that ancient enemy because he emitted the same aura. In fact, Mars suspected that Dragon's mastery over the fruit had already surpassed that of its previous wielder, making Dragon an even greater threat to the world government. As Mars and Dragon continued their fierce mid-air clash, suddenly, Nujuro, in his hybrid Bakotsu mode, leapt up and slashed his sword toward the revolutionary leader. Dragon's focus was now divided. He had to think quickly about how to fight both of them at once. He understood that Mars' advantage lay in his long-range attacks and aerial mobility. Plus, Mars still had full stamina since he had only recently joined the battle. Meanwhile, Nujuro's advantage was speed. Therefore, Dragon needed to act with perfect precision, as one wrong move could prove fatal. Dragon also considered the possibility of Garling joining the fight again, even though Garling was still occupied battling other opponents elsewhere. As for Warcury and Jupiter, they remained locked in combat against powerful figures from the revolutionary side, such as the leaders of the Lunarians and Buccaneers, Ivankov, and several other strong allies. For now, those two Gorosei were unable to intervene in the main battle anytime soon. Being able to assess all this in the middle of a chaotic fight proved once again that Dragon was an extraordinary individual, not only a formidable warrior, but also a brilliant strategist. Meanwhile, as the battle raged above Mary Joyce, the situation below the red line on the New World side was heating up as well. As previously discussed in another video, the second strongest rebel group in the world had arrived there. Why second strongest? Because the number one group was, of course, the Revolutionary Army. This group had never allied with the revolutionaries, as their leader held differing views from Monkey D. Dragon. However, upon learning that Dragon had launched a massive assault on Mary Jiwaz, this leader was inspired to join the cause, recognizing Dragon's bold and daring move. As the leader of the world's second strongest rebel faction, this man possessed immense power. Beneath the Red Line, he fought Vice Admirals Onigumo and Momonga. Onigumo had already been defeated earlier, and now Momonga too had fallen. He acknowledged that both were capable Vice Admirals, but even so, they were no match for him. His subordinates had already cornered the Marines stationed there. Shifting to Elbaf, the elder of the Elbaf village, known as the Hunter's Village, appeared once again. Previously, he had discussed the stages of Nika's powers, starting with manipulation, followed by imagination, and finally, the power of solar energy. His young giant daughter remarked, "It must be so exciting to read the Book of the Sun God, but sadly, only you and Skapar Gaben are allowed to read it by Sao." The elder replied, "Besides the Book of the Sun God, there are also many other fascinating books in the Owl Library. For example, if the book about Nika bears the symbol of the Sun God on its cover, there is another book with a sword symbol on it. I believe that book contains information about the God of the Blade. Unfortunately, I never got the chance to read it back then, since I was more interested in the one about the Sun God Nika." The village chief said that he had also explored the Owl Library and discovered that it didn't only contain books, but also many other fascinating objects. Among them were legendary weapons of various sizes, some designed for giants and others for humans. However, when he tried to lift one of those weapons, he couldn't budge it. Saul had once told the elder that only someone with extremely strong haki could lift those weapons, so it was natural that the elder, who was relatively weak, couldn't do it. Even the human-sized weapons, which looked small compared to a giant, were too heavy for him to lift. This clearly showed that haki was a crucial factor in wielding those legendary weapons. The existence of the book about the sword god, Dewa Padang, and the presence of these legendary weapons, including ones sized for humans, indicate that Zoro will likely be the one to obtain both the sword god book and one of the legendary blades. On Elbaf, Zoro has been sharpening his haki abilities even further. His Hawoshoku haki, Conqueror's haki, has also grown significantly stronger. Therefore, Zoro will surely be able to wield a legendary weapon that consumes an immense amount of haki, just as he was able to quickly master Enma, a sword known for draining its wielder's haki. Thus, while Luffy will gain knowledge about the powers of the Sun God from the Book of the Sun God, Zoro will obtain wisdom about swordsmanship and divine blades from the Book of the Sword God in the Owl Library. It's even possible that Zoro will acquire one of those legendary swords himself. The scene then shifts to Imu-sama, who is seen flying within the realm of the Sun World. Imu can sense that all the nightmare monsters and demonic giants that had descended into the lower world have now been defeated. As previously discussed, Luffy had already defeated them all. The nightmare monsters were completely obliterated by Luffy, while the demonic giants were knocked unconscious by his thunder attacks. This was because those demonic giants were, in truth, Elbaf giants, controlled by Imu-sama's power. Therefore, Luffy avoided killing them and instead merely rendered them unconscious, so that once the conflict on Elbaf was over, they could be restored to their normal forms. When Imu-sama realized this, rage consumed them, and they released a massive burst of Haoshoku haki. Imu's Conqueror's haki was so immense that it radiated across the entirety of Elbaf. Everyone on the island felt it, including Luffy, Loki, and Gaben, who were in the lower world. Loki said, "It seems someone's furious about what Luffy did, defeating the nightmare monsters and those demonic giants." Luffy replied, Good, because I'm about to beat up that angry person next. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the sun world of Elbaf, Sol, still injured, was monitoring the situation. He too could feel Imu-sama's immense haki. He also witnessed the actions of the demonic giants and realized they were actually Elbaf giants transformed by the enemy's power. Sol recalled an ancient book he had once read in the Owl Library. The book described a mysterious ancient ability that could transform people into demons, allowing the user to command them at will. Over time, that ability came to be regarded as a myth by most people, even though it had truly existed. Sol was astonished to see that what he had once read as myth was now unfolding before his very eyes. Looking toward Imu-sama, who was still floating in the sky, Sol said that if the world was ever to find peace, then that demon must be destroyed. The scene then shifts again to Hachinosu, which comes back into focus. In the heart of the island, the fierce battle between Shanks and Blackbeard continued. As they fought, Blackbeard spoke of various things, one of which was Shanks's origins as a celestial dragon, Tenryubito. Although Shanks himself had rejected that status, Blackbeard apparently knew the truth. He claimed to have learned from old information that Shanks had once visited Mary Gawai's, but later chose to return to the sea and live as a pirate. Blackbeard wondered why Shanks made that choice. After all, if Shanks had chosen to remain a celestial dragon, he could have lived a life of luxury. He might even have become the strongest holy knight, just like his twin brother, Shamrock. Together, the two would have been a formidable force for the world government. In response, Shanks explained why he refused to join the world government and chose instead to live freely as a pirate. It was because of his morals and humanity. Shanks had long known about the corruption of the world government, especially the celestial dragons, and he refused to become scum like them. To Shanks, living as a free pirate was far more honorable than being a celestial dragon. Blackbeard laughed and said that being raised by Roger clearly shaped Shanks into a true pirate. He even admitted that he respected Shanks' decision to live as a pirate rather than a celestial dragon, as Blackbeard himself also saw piracy as his true calling. However, Blackbeard then pointed out that the world was descending into chaos and heading toward a massive global war. In that war, the world government would undoubtedly be one of the strongest factions. For everyone else, there would only be two choices: join the world government or oppose it. Since Shanks had refused to side with them, Blackbeard assumed that Shanks would naturally become one of their enemies in that great war. He then asked, "So, Shanks, would you be willing to fight your own twin brother, Shamrock, when the time comes?" Shanks calmly replied, saying that both he and Shamrock were adults with their own choices. If those choices led them to fight one another, then so be it. It couldn't be avoided. They would have to battle to the very end if there was no other way. Blackbeard grinned and said, "That's a strong conviction you've got there." But he also mocked Shanks, saying, "Though honestly, you won't need to worry about that war, because I'm going to finish you off right here on Hachinosu." Hearing that, Shanks swiftly launched a counterattack, seizing the perfect moment to strike. After landing his blow, the red-haired pirate said coldly, "You're too overconfident, Blackbeard. That's why you always let your guard down, and why you keep getting hit hard." So, that's all for today. Some interesting details from the latest One Piece chapter and more. What do you think about it? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next exciting videos. And Yosh!